Hi guys, today we are going to do lesson 3.6 where we're going to solve multi-step inequalities. So make sure you open up there in your notes. And actually today's lesson is going to be awesome because we are not learning anything new. We are going to combine what we know about solving multi-step equations with what we've learned about inequalities over the past several days. So let's review real quick what we know about inequalities. We've talked about how when we get an answer, we have to graph it at the end, and that will still be true today. When we talked about multiplying and dividing, using multiplication and division to solve, we talked about how if you multiply or divide by a negative number, you need to flip the inequality sign, and that will still be true today. But when we solve these multi-step ones, we are going to solve them with the same steps we would as if it were an equation. So hopefully a lot of this will look familiar to you. All right, on the first two examples, we write out for you step by step what to do, so you can use those steps to help you as well. All right, so the first thing is we're going to rewrite the original inequality. So x over negative 4 minus 6 is greater than or equal to negative 5. And if you'd like to keep change, you can. But my goal is to get x by itself, so I need to move away what is with the x or on the same side as the x. So the first thing I'm going to do is add 6 to both sides. And just like with an equation, whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other side. So I have x over negative 4, and then that canceled, which is good, is greater than or equal to 1, because negative 5 plus 6 is 1. All right, now I have x divided by negative 4. So the inverse of division is multiplication, so I'm going to multiply each side by negative 4. All right, so those negative 4s cancel, which gives me x. And then remember, when we multiply or divide each side by a negative number, we need to reverse our inequality sign. So the greater than or equal to becomes a less than or equal to, and then 1 times negative 4 is negative 4. And so that's my answer, because those last couple steps I kind of all did in one step together. All right, so now we've talked about how x can be an infinite amount of things, so we have to show it on a number line, just like we've been doing to show all of the possible solutions. Well, because x is less than or equal to negative 4 can be one of the solutions, so we need to fill in that circle, and then x has to be less than that, so my arrow goes to the left. All right, now we are going to still do check steps. Remember, in your check step, you have to go back to the original inequality, which means the way the sign was facing in the original problem. And I need to plug in something for x. It needs to be less than or equal to negative 4. And it's best if you pick something less than negative 4, because if you pick negative 4, if your arrow's wrong, it doesn't check that well. So I'm going to pick something less than negative 4. I could pick negative 5, but as you look at the problem, hopefully you see that negative 5 would be a harder choice than is necessary, because you would end up with a fraction and then you'd have to deal with common denominators and stuff. So I'd rather not do that. So I'm going to pick negative 8, since that will divide by negative 4 evenly. You could also pick negative 12 or negative 20, or you could pick negative 10 or negative 9. It's just going to be a little bit harder for you. All right, so negative 8 divided by negative 4 is positive 2, and 2 minus 6, or I can keep change, 2 plus negative 6 is negative 4. Remember, in your check step, you're not going to necessarily get the same number on each side, but you need to have a true statement. Well, negative 4 is greater than negative 5, so I know that I am good. All right, let's try the next one. We have 4x plus 1 is greater than 9. Again, my goal is to get x by itself, so the first thing that I need to do is subtract 1 from both sides. That gives me 4x is greater than 8. Then between the 4 and the x is multiplication, so I undo multiplication with division. So I'm going to divide each side by 4. Which gives me x is greater than 2. On this one, I did not need to flip my inequality sign because I divided by a positive number, so there's no need to flip it. So I'm going to put 0, 2, and negative 2 on my number line. This one is an open circle because x is not equal to 2. 2 is the starting point, but not one of the solutions. And then x is greater, so I go to the right. All right, let's go to our check step. We've got 4x plus 1 is greater than 9. I need to pick something bigger than 2. So I'm going to go ahead and just pick 3. You could pick 4, 5, 6, 10, 100. But again, make it as easy for yourself as it can be. So 4 times 3 is 12. And 12 plus 1 is 13. And 13 is greater than 9. That's a true statement, so I know I found a good answer that worked. All right, we're going to just keep practicing some more. Now they don't have the steps written out for you step by step, but hopefully you can still figure it out here as we go. So number 1, I want x by itself. Now the x does happen to be on the other side of the inequality. So your choice is you can either flip the sides and flip the inequality right at the beginning, or you can wait till the end to do that. It doesn't matter. I'm going to go ahead and just wait till the end. So I'm going to start by adding 3 to both sides. Again, whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other side. So this would be 10 is greater than or equal to 5x, because those 3's canceled. Then I'm going to divide each side by 5, and I get 2 is greater than or equal to x. Or I always like to have the variable coming first. So this would be x is less than or equal to 2. You could write your answer either way. And again, if you wanted to flip this at the very beginning and make it 5x minus 3 is less than or equal to 7, you could do that at the very beginning as well. Just make sure when you flip the sides that you flip the inequality sign. And on this one, I did not have to flip it in my answer when I divided because I divided by positive 5. So no need to flip there. All right, so I'm going to put 0, 2, and negative 2 on my number line. This would be a closed circle because 2 is included in the solution and x is less than that, so I go to the left. And then I do need to do a check step. So I go back to my original, 7 is greater than or equal to 5x minus 3. I have to pick something less than 2, or I could pick 2, but it's better to pick something less than 2. So I'm going to go ahead and just pick 1. So I've got 5 times 1 is 5. 5 minus 3 is 2, and 7 is greater than 2. That is a true statement. So I know I've got the right answer there. All right, let's go on and try number 2. Again, I'm trying to get x by itself. So I'm going to start by subtracting 6 from both sides. That gives me x divided by negative 2 is less than negative 20. If you need to keep change, think about that as negative 14 plus negative 6. Do that. Be careful with those negatives. Then I have division, so I'm going to undo it with multiplication, and I'm multiplying each side by negative 2 or negative 2 over 1. Now, I am multiplying each side by a negative, so I need to flip my inequality sign. So I get x is greater than 40 as my answer. So on my number line, I put 0, 40, and negative 40. This is an open circle because 40 is not included in the answer. And the arrow goes to the right because it is greater than. Now we'll go ahead and do the check step. So I've got x divided by negative 2 plus 6. Remember, in your check step, put the inequality sign the way it was facing in the original problem. All right, and I want to pick something divisible by 2. I could pick 41, but that's going to leave me with a fraction. I'd rather not have a fraction. So to make this easy, I'm going to go ahead and just pick 50. But you could pick anything bigger than 40. So 50 divided by negative 2 is negative 25. Negative 25 plus 6 is negative 19, which is in fact less than negative 14. So that worked out for me. All right, we are going to skip 3 and we're going to go to 4, because you'll notice 4 is a little different because we have variables on both sides of the equal sign. Now, we've solved equations that have variables on both sides of the equal sign, so this is no different. Don't worry. I'm going to go ahead and start this by putting a 1 in front of the y. Remember, we can put a 1 there if we want. So my goal is to get my y terms on one side and my constants on the other. So you could either subtract 5y from both sides or subtract 1y from both sides. I think it's going to be a little easier to subtract 1y because that's going to keep my coefficient in front of y positive, which I'd rather do if I can. Okay, then now this should look familiar. I want to get y by itself, so next I'm going to subtract 2, which gives me 4y is less than or equal to 32. I divide each side by 4. I don't need to flip the inequality sign because I'm dividing by a positive, and I get y is less than or equal to 8. And again, there's other ways you could solve that, but no matter which way you do, your answer should always come out the same. So now I'm going to put 0, 8, and -8 on my number line. This is a closed circle because 8 is part of the solution, and y is less than 8. So now we're ready to do our check step, and in our check step, we go back to the original. 5y plus 2 is less than or equal to y plus 34. I've got 2 y's in the problem. That's fine. Whatever I pick y to be, I'm going to plug it in twice. So I'm going to go ahead and plug in 1 because that's less than 8. So I've got 5 times 1 plus 2 is less than or equal to 1 plus 34. So that's 5 plus 2 is less than or equal to 35. And 7 is less than 35, so I got a true statement there, so I'm good. So again, if you have variables on both sides, no big deal. You just solve it the same way you did equations that had variables on both sides as well. All right, why don't you now pause the video and try 5 and 6. When you think you've figured them both out, press play and check your answers. All right, go ahead and check your answers with mine. Notice on number 5, we had to divide by -2, so I did have to flip my inequality sign when I did that. And in my check step, I plugged in 1, but again, you could have plugged in anything bigger than -8, so your check step might not end the same way mine did, but it should still end with a true statement. Now on number 6, I also had to multiply each side by a negative, so I had to flip my inequality sign. So this one gets a little tricky because I flipped it when I multiplied by a negative, but then I also at the end flipped it to flip the x and the 4, if that makes sense. So it kind of ended up looking the same way, but that's because the variable and the number switched sides, which you can do, but you don't have to do. So this one's a closed circle and it has to be bigger than 4. So in my check step, I wanted to pick something divisible by 4 so I didn't have to deal with a fraction. So I picked 8, but you could have picked 12, 16, 20, or you could have dealt with the fraction if you wanted to. And again, 6 is a good example of where you could pick 4, but if you pick something bigger than 4, it helps you better check your answer, because if you had forgot to flip your inequality sign when you multiplied by a negative, your check step would have checked that better for you. All right, now go ahead and pause your video and try number 7 and 8. These are the last 2 we're going to do, so when you are finished with 7 and 8, press play to check your answers. All right, go ahead and check your answers with mine. Notice on number 7, I added that 1 in front of the x, and then I did a keep change to make that -1x, just so I didn't lose that negative sign there. And then when I divided by the -1, I did need to flip the inequality sign, so don't forget to do that. On number 8, again, this is one where you have variables on both sides, so there is more than one way to solve this problem. I decided to subtract 1y from both sides so that I could keep my coefficient in front of y positive. You could subtract 2y from both sides, but then be careful because on the left side, you would have a -1y, so when you divide by that -1, you would need to flip your inequality sign. No matter which way you do it, you would get the same answer, but you just have to be careful and pay attention to that whenever you multiply or divide each side by a negative, you do have to flip or reverse that inequality sign. All right, so that's all for today. Hopefully you see that solving multi-step inequalities is very similar to solving multi-step equations. And we're just combining the things that we've learned about equations with the things that we've learned about inequalities. So for each of them, you will solve them, graph them, and check your answer. Good luck!